You can start to run your race with the lower pressures, but expect them to come on later in the race, say from laps 10 to 20 rather than the first 10 laps, where it's going to be really difficult to stay with that lead pack. But boy, you are going to come home strong, so you better be ready. Hey you guys, welcome back to the Power Public YouTube channel. Today's video we're doing Q&A. So thanks to everybody that's written in, especially our new Patreon subscribers and our YouTube members. Now if you haven't signed up to those things already, please feel free to, because that support that we get from you guys really helps us keep these how-to videos coming. So the first question is from Ryan McGuigan, and he's one of our Patreons, and his question was, hey Des, I want to rebuild my own engine and I have an Iami Mini Swift. What tools do I need? Now Ryan, the tools you're going to need are mostly metric sockets, like a socket set and a spanner set, but realistically it's probably an 8, a 10 and a 13 millimeter. They're going to be the most common. You will also need some screwdrivers and some T-bar Allen keys. Now to do the actual engine building part, you probably need a pick and a couple of little pullers. But if you're just doing the top end rebuild, you'll have to measure the cylinder, and to do that you're going to need a bore gauge or a bore micrometer and also some just an outside micrometer. Now if you haven't got those things, that's okay. You can take your cylinder to a motorbike shop or some other engine repair business and they'll be able to prepare the cylinder for you and put the piston in it, and then you can just reassemble it at home. Now to do the squish gap, and also which is setting your cylinder height, and to check your ignition timing, you're probably going to need a dial indicator and some 2mm solder. If you don't know how to do that, we have a video on it. It's on the Vortex Mini Rock, but it's going to transfer straight over to your Army Swift. The next question comes from another Patreon supporter, so thank you so much. And he was asking, he is having problems with his ribs and what suggestions I could make to alleviate some of that pain, even though he's tried different seats and different rib protectors. So what I would suggest, if you are still having pain while you're driving, obviously you're going to have to hit the gym and live a healthy lifestyle. As crazy as that sounds, those little things can help. With your seat, you could get a slightly bigger seat and then lay a lot of padding in, especially around the sort of the top of the seat, because that's where I find I get a lot of pain here on the ribs here, because when you're going through the corners, there's a lot of lateral force on your rib cage. And the upper part of my back is where I feel the most pain, so I'd be definitely hitting my pads into this section here, along with running maybe a tillet seat, which has a slightly deeper side to it, and also running the tillet rib protector or a Greyhound rib protector. I find those give me the best rib protection. The next question comes from L-Tape, and he's asking about the differences in the 40 to the 50mm axle, and he's running an L206 as well. So I haven't had a lot of experience, like I said, with the L206 or the 4-stroke category, but generally you're running a lower grip, sort of harder compound tire, where it does seem to slide a little bit. Now, the 50mm axles are bigger in diameter. Basically, the bigger you go, the stiffer it is. With that said, there's obviously different grades of 50s and different grades of 40s. But generally speaking, for the sort of harder compound tires, you're going to run the smaller diameter axles. So if you're running a hard compound tire with a Briggs, I'll probably have a tendency to stick with a 40mm axle. That would be my preference. And then if you're running a very sticky tire, which I don't believe you would on a low-powered engine like the Briggs, so I'd probably steer clear of those 50s because they're going to be that little bit stiffer than the 40s. Okay, so the next question comes from Holly Holden Stewart 57, and they're asking about their KA100 going over 135 degrees, and they're having all sorts of troubles, doesn't matter what track they're at. Now, what I would suggest there is if you are having troubles with the temperature of your engine, especially air-cooled engines, you can run a cooler spark plug, so you go from the 9 up to the 10, and you could add some more oil to your petrol. That will help keeping the engine temperatures down a little bit. Then failing that, you'd want to just double check your ignition timing. Maybe you have too much advance setting the engine, and the engine's staying loaded up too much, and the engine's getting a little hotter, so you might be able to knock out 0.2, 0.3 of a millimeter on your ignition timing. You can do that with the dial indicator, like we said earlier in the video, and we do have a video that covers how to check ignition timing on a Mini Rock, but it's the same for your KA100. Another question from Holly was, she's struggling to remember the difference between the caster and the camber. Any suggestions? So your camber moves the wheels in and out at the top, and the caster moves them forwards and backwards. The next question comes from Brian, and he's got an Arrow kart and wants to know how to shim his brakes. Now, we do have a video on how to shim brakes. They're for a Tony kart, but it is almost the identical process for the Arrow. You're just going to remove the pad retaining bolts and then slide the shims in between the pads and the pistons if you have the non-self-adjusting brake system. And the last question from Brian 1070 is his kart is pulling to the right even though his snipers are checking out perfect. He's probably getting your kart onto a chassis straightening rack because you might have a slight bend in the chassis. But if the kart is pulling, I'd say there's a bend somewhere. A common one is the rear bar bends up where behind the brake caliper to the rear bar, that can actually bend up a little bit. Otherwise, there can be just a little twist in the waist of the chassis. Now, if you take it to your local go-kart shop or chassis straightening professional, they're going to put it on a rack, tweak it all back to factory settings, and you'll be back on the track dominating in no time. Okay, so the next question comes from Fluxy, and he's asking, how do you become a mechanic in the go-kart industry? So basically, any mechanical apprenticeship would be excellent, or fitting and machining, tool making, boiler making, sheet metal working, any of the sort of mechanical trades. Otherwise, you just need to have a real strong passion for karting. But if you practice a lot, you'll become good at it. Just like anything, you don't actually need a trade per se. You can just be very good at what you do. Be the best that you can be at fixing go-karts, and you'll always be in high demand. Another question we've got here is from SML070, and he's asking, would a kart for around $1,000 be competitive? I'm going to say no, straight up. New karts are the most competitive. That's why all the top guys and top teams buy and use them for winning major events. Now, if your budget's around $1,000, go for it. Karting's fun for anyone, but maybe just steer clear of the racing. Another question is from Anders, and he's asking if we've got any dyno results for the DD2. Now, we do not. The DD2 doesn't actually run on our engine dyno, and you probably really need a rolling road for that one. The engine rebuilding we do on the DD2s here, for our customers, we just generally run in at the track. Ollie Bishop has been asking about the Rotax Junior Max, rather the new one versus the old non-Evo. Since the introduction of the Evo engine, everyone has sort of migrated over to that platform. They really are excellent. So if you do have an old one, it has to be an absolute screamer to keep up with these modern J-Max engines. So I would lean towards the new Evo Junior Max engine. The next question from Riley Vandy78 is he wants to know all about axles, soft, hard, and also to servicing of the bearings, etc. So the difference in the soft, medium, and hard axles is always going to be really dependent on yourself. And we've said this a few times. It's the same for me, and it's going to be the same for you. Get yourself a soft, a medium, and a hard, and go to your local track with your tires and test them for yourself. But generally speaking, colder conditions we use the softer axles, and hotter conditions we're using the harder axles. That being said, for your car, your track, your tires, it could be the inverse of that, or the exact opposite of what I just said. So just go to your track, try them on different days, try them in different conditions, and really start to paint that picture for yourself so you know when to execute the soft, the medium, or the hard. Okay, so the next question comes from Sebastian Guest, and he's asking about tire pressures for longer races. Well, generally speaking, the longer races, we're flipping over to those MXC wheels from the Tony Kart Group. They're excellent wheels for the longer races because you don't get as much pressure build-up. And also, too, if you're traditionally running that 10, 11, or 12 pounds, we're going to drop that down to the 8, 9, or 10 pounds, depending on relatively to where you are. So if you do have a longer race, especially if it is in summer, you can start to run your race with the lower pressures, but expect them to come on later in the race. Say from laps 10 to 20 rather than the first 10 laps, where it's going to be really difficult to stay with that lead pack. But boy, you are going to come home strong, so you better be ready. Another question about the DD2 Rotax engine has come from 2Big05, and he's asking about how often do we rebuild them. Look, I keep my DD2 engines in and around under the 15-hour mark, sort of the 12 hours for your piston and ring, and then we're switching out the conrods and main bearings every second rebuild, so around the 30-hour mark. Okay, so the next question comes from Josh Townsend, and he's asking what are some of the things that he can do for his go-kart, and he's got a Rotax, mind you, in cold weather. What I generally do is I stiffen up the kart a little bit, so I'm running the standard Tony Kart seat instead of the Tillet VG, which is what we run up here in southeast Queensland because it's always hot. And then we can tune those axles back down to the medium. And then if we are having a little problem with the axle, we can slip in a softer grade. That's what I'll do for colder weather for myself. One of the other things you can do is come back from your MXC wheels to your standard MXJ wheels that come with the Tony Kart. They're going to come on a little bit sooner, and if it's really cold, I'd be going back to a set of alloy wheels as well. The next question comes from Marta Savage, and he's asking about their Rotax gearbox oil. How often should we change it in the Evo or the non-Evo, and how much we use? So we use 80 milliliters. We just use the standard old ATF or automatic transmission fluid. Some guys just leave it in there and bring it back when they get their engine done for a rebuild, so every 10 to 15 hours. It's pretty hardy stuff, and 15 hours of use is not much for the gears. They're not really doing that much in there, as in power transmission, so the oil doesn't get smashed apart. However, it can get contaminated with moisture. So if you're running in the wet a lot, that's a good time to change that gearbox oil out. After you've been running in the wet, you bring the kart home, clean everything down, obviously change the air filter, wash all the air box out and the carburetor, and you can do your gearbox oil at the same time. The next question is from Felipe, and he's asking about the KZ engines, specifically the TM10B, 10C. Now they are a few years old, but they're still super handy, especially if you're a hobby racer. Now I love the KZ engines. They're so much fun. If you haven't driven one, beg, borrow and steal, rent one, hire one, do whatever you can, but definitely have a drive in a KZ. They are insane. I love them, and you're gonna love them too, so get your hands on one. Now, that being said, their maintenance costs do go up with a KZ engine. The guys generally at the front are just throwing pistons at these things, but you've got to remember, those guys are trying to win some pretty big races. But for us guys that are just going out there and having a bit of fun, you don't actually have to throw the pistons at them that often, because you're not running them that lean that you're blowing the piston out of the engine. Now, they are under incredible load, yes, but if you are just at your local track and you've got regular pump fuel, you've got a little bit more oil in it, you fatten the jetting up a bit so the engine's not running as lean, your engine's going to last way longer. And it's not uncommon to run them for about 10 hours. Now, that being said, there's other guys that measure how many litres of fuel they're putting through the engines, like 20 litres of fuel. Now, they might buzz that in 2 days, which is going to be around 2 to 3 hours worth of use. And then they're going to be rebuilding that engine. So they do cop a bit of a flogging. And if you are going to be racing them, yes, you will do the maintenance at a way faster repetitions. But if you're just having a bit of fun, you will still have increased maintenance over, say, your Rotax 125, but you're going to have way more fun because you're going faster, and speed costs money, no matter which way you cut it. So get yourself a KZ, use it as much as you can afford, and then when you can't afford it no more, put it away, save up your money, and then you can go karting again. But you're going to have so much fun. So I definitely recommend getting yourself a KZ kart, especially the TMB or a TMC. The next question comes from a local racer, Peter Bossons, and he has 2 Rotax engines on a go-kart. Yes, sounds crazy, and it is, but he keeps chewing out his front tires. Now, Pete, what I'd suggest there, mate, is trying to get that seat forward and move some weight to over the front axles. You're probably, with those 2 massive engines sitting out there on the back of the kart, it's probably having a tendency to push and scrub those tires out. We're talking run a max caster as well, probably. Front torsion bars, so you get some rigidity in the front of the kart, because you've got a lot of weight to sort of jack through the back of the kart. Also too, maybe you could run a softer axle if you're not getting any flex in the back of the kart, because you've got those 2 big engines on there. And hopefully that's going to help you sort of unload that inside wheel and stop pushing and scrubbing out your front tires. Okay, so the next question comes from Armando, and he's asking about the temperature. At 40 he does this time, at 20 he's doing this time, and at 5 degrees his time's blowing right out. And he's asking about, does he need to change his jetting? Well, I've always found myself personally that the jetting is pretty constant for most temperature ranges, but humidity and air pressure catch me out. So if it's very dry or it's very high pressure, okay, you're going to get some great air to make some huge horsepower, so you're going to need to actually jet up a little bit for that. And then inversely, if it's really humid or the dew point has come up, or you've got really low pressure, you're going to have to lean out your jetting. But saying that too is what you're asking in regards to air temperature is, I think when the air temperature is 5 degrees, the reason your lap times are slow is because the track and the rubber is so much colder. I wouldn't worry about changing your jetting too much for your lap times there. You're just going to be slow because there's just not as much grip. As the ambient temperature increases, the tyres are going to get softer and stickier and you're going to be able to go through the corners faster. So the last question we have time for today comes from our friend Tyson. He's asking about wet weather tyres, whether we want them hot or cold, or do we, swerve around looking for puddles like we see on TV from, different race cars and stuff like that, and also about the pressures. So what we want for the wet weather tyres, when the rain is actually really coming down heavy and you have a lot of standing water on the track, we're going to run 20 to 25 PSI in the tyres as we run out of the grid. You can run lower, and some guys prefer that, but most of the guys I've worked with like the tyres in that 20 to 25 PSI range. So it sort of makes the tyre sort of have that good solid structure because it is a very soft rubber. And also too, it sort of bows the tyre up a little bit so that contact patch is small, cuts through the standing water, and also it can make the tyre rubber get a little bit hotter if there is any friction, so you will actually get a little bit more grip in the wet. And that being said, as the track starts to dry, as there's no standing water, but it's still very greasy, okay, if you run too much tyre pressure, you're going to chew out the very middle of the tyre and you're not going to use the whole tread pattern. So that's when you're going to drop your tyre pressures down back somewhere to the 12 to 15 PSI range. Now the reason you're going to be searching for puddles out on the track is only if the track has dried halfway through your race and you're starting to cook your wet weather tyres relatively to everybody else. That's when you're going to start searching out for the cooler puddles to try to cool the rubber back down. Otherwise, the tyres are going to get very greasy very quickly and you're going to start racing yourself backwards. So look for puddles when the track is drying out. Okay, so there you have it. That is the last question for today's video and also the last video for the year. So thank you to everybody that has subscribed, liked our videos, turned on those pesky notifications. But I'd really like to say thank you to all our Patreon supporters and our YouTube members. Now, if you haven't had enough of us, we'll still be blowing up Instagram and Facebook over the next couple of weeks. So you can check that all out at Power Republic, or you can go to our amazing website, www.powerrepublic.com.au, and grab yourself a t-shirt or one of our amazing tutorial series. Maybe get it for someone for Christmas. I don't know, just saying. So thank you to everybody. 2020, it's been a crazy year. Hope you're all safe wherever you are, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Today's video, we're talking Q&A. Now, we have done this before, and I don't know what I'm saying. So this week we had a couple of funny questions out there, so thanks to all those guys that wrote those in, but they will get cut out and so will this segment. I'm going to do that again, I wasn't happy. Okay, so the first question is from Wyan. Now if you can't rebuild the cylinder yourself, you're going to have to take it to an engine sort of you're going to have to take that to an engine. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. It's pretty, it's going to be very similar across most engines, especially those 60C engines. 60C? 60cc.